There's no point in expressing my appreciation for it was a very creative introduction, not impressive, but it had a certain ring to it. Steve, thank you. And I actually looked for a Steve Clements mask, but they haven't found one yet. But and who knows how I might show up tomorrow at the White House. I was going to do a Jim Jones, but he left tonight, and he was with you today. Thank you, Steve, and thank you for what you mean to our country. There are some individuals that actually educate and inform and enhance the national debate, and Steve does that. And to you and your colleagues, thank you, Steve. I want to also acknowledge the recipient of your honor tonight, Victor Governor, for his leadership, his efforts, and all the contributions that he has made, not just to this cause, but to our country. And I want to thank J Street for inviting me to speak at their first national conference, Driving Change, Securing Peace. I share your commitment to American leadership helping end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict justly and peacefully. And I share with you that this commitment represents strong support for both Israel's security and for the U.S.-Israel relationship. Citizens of the world live within the sovereignty of man-made borders, but also within the realities of a global community. Either we understand this and accept these realities of a world of different religions and cultures and attempt to accommodate these differences, or we will live in a world of perpetual violence and hatred. That is the stark choice that faces a world of 6.5 billion people and soon to be 8 billion. That is also the stark question that presents itself to mankind. Will we be wise enough and courageous enough to find man-made solutions to man-made injustice and problems? In his column a couple of weeks ago, Tom Friedman noted the poisonous political environment that we have allowed to develop in our country today, which affects our decision-making, respectful and informed discussion of difficult issues, and building a consensus to govern. He related it to the political environment that he saw in Israel in 1995 when Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. Friedman was right to point out this present-day danger. For if we cannot rise above it, we will surely all pay a heavy price, especially our next generation, for failing the world at an historic moment of possibilities. As Friedman noted, the future of the Middle East is one of these great issues, caught in this current irresponsible downdraft of destruction. Political atmospherics set the tone and frame the debate of all great issues. They can either enhance or destroy political change. All nations have interests, and their policies are driven by those interests. But it is humanity, the respect for all people, that should serve as a guidepost for our policies and relationships in the world. President Obama has placed the Middle East conflict at the center of U.S. strategic policy. He deserves strong support for his leadership and courage. We all recognize that the Middle East represents an explosive political issue for any president. The history of failure hangs heavy over this issue with high accompanying political risks. My friends and former colleagues who were introduced tonight are here tonight because they believe this, that we can make a better world. They also clearly understand this harsh political reality and the risks of these deep, swift, and unpredictable political currents. I have great admiration for members of Congress who are willing to put aside political differences and invest their political futures in helping shape and produce a just and lasting peace for all people in the Middle East. There are differences on how the Middle East conflict should be resolved. There should be differences. But those differences must not stop the process from moving forward to find a common ground for a just and accepted peace by all sides. Yes, it requires risks, and it is difficult. But what is the alternative? The alternative is more hatred and violence affecting more people in more countries. This American president understands that a diplomatic and peaceful resolution to the Arab-Israeli conflict would not jeopardize Israel's future, but rather is an essential reality for Israel's future. The United States' support for Israel need not be, nor should it be, an either-or proposition that dictates our relationships with our Arab allies and friends. The U.S. has a long and special relationship with Israel, but it must not come at the expense of our Arab relationships. That is a false choice and not in the interest of Israel or the United States. This is a much-used distortion that plays to the single-issue benefits of certain groups. The fact is, we all need each other. U.S. interests are served by having strong relationships with both Israelis and Arabs, as is Israel's interests, reflecting on its relationships with Egypt and Jordan. As long as nations continue to be driven by the lowest common denominator of conflict and instability, they will be incapable of rising above the swamps of conflict to clearly view their long-term interests for more than just day-to-day survival. But rather, they must give their people a future worthy of the dignity of man. This divisive strategy, attempting to make the U.S. choose between its relationships with the Israelis and Arabs, perpetuates the current state of instability and mistrust and continues to drive us toward more and deeper conflict. It destroys any possibility for positive political atmospherics that are always critical in attempting to resolve historic conflicts. The radicals and extremists will continue to use religion and intolerant canons of life to recruit desperate, hopeless people. And they will use their twisted extremism to hate and kill and subjugate others to their will. The world's great religions do not preach this hatred and violence. Why can't we sort this out? Terrorists and extremists exploit the Arab-Israeli conflict and use it as one of their most potent recruiting tools and potent arguments against Israel and the United States. Why do we continue to empower them and give them this weapon that they so effectively use against us? The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is central, not peripheral, to U.S. vital security interests in combating terrorism, preventing an Iranian nuclear weapon, stability in the Middle East, and U.S. and global energy security. The Middle East is more combustible, complicated, and dangerous today than it's ever been. How does this continued danger and uncertainty benefit Israel, the Arabs, or the United States? America has not been without its share of tragedy, especially in this region, with its loss of over 5,200 Americans during the last 8 years of wars. Today, we have 200,000 troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, engaged in two of our longest wars, with Afghanistan soon becoming the longest in our history. President Obama's approach to achieving a Middle East peace is connected to other vital regional and global issues, like helping forge an emerging Arab consensus on peace, combating terrorism, and future relationships with Iran and Syria. These issues are all in the long-term interests of Israel, the U.S., the Middle East, and the world. There is an emerging consensus on the peace process in the Arab world, but it is fragile, fragmented, and dependent on progress on the Israeli-Palestinian peace track. In July of this year, Crown Prince of Bahrain wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post calling for Arab-Israeli dialogue and referencing a potentially immense peace dividend for all countries and the prospects for communication and trade between countries and peoples. He said, quote, "When stability pays, conflict becomes too costly. We must do more now to achieve peace," end of quote. The Crown Prince's op-ed began with reference to the Arab Peace Initiative, offered by then Crown Prince, now King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, at the Arab League Summit in Beirut in March 2002. It was a significant breakthrough. It was significant because for the first time ever, all 22 members of the Arab League had come forward with a unanimously agreed-to peace initiative. This, after years of the United States telling the Arabs that they must get involved and take responsibility and leadership for helping resolve this conflict. Well, they did, but the last administration ignored it. At its core, the Beirut Initiative offers to end the Arab-Israeli conflict, enter into a peace agreement with Israel, provide security for all states in the region, and establish normal relations with Israel. And in return for Israel withdrawing from all land occupied since 1967, a just solution to the Palestinian refugee problem, and acceptance of a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Israel could not have immediately accepted the Arab Initiative in its totality. All of these issues will require negotiation, but this was an important opening, a very important opportunity. Progress toward an eventual peace is going to be difficult, painful for both sides. Both sides are going to have to give and compromise. And the bottom line will be, are these compromises worth a just and lasting peace? Only the Israelis and the Arabs can decide that. The U.S. nor any country or institution can impose peace on them. What we can do is facilitate a peace process and act as the sponsor and facilitator of that process and use our considerable influence to facilitate a just and wise outcome. It is my opinion that we do not have the luxury of indefinite time before a new peace process is agreed and activated. We are beyond the step-by-step confidence-building timeframe that has been tried in the past. We have witnessed past Middle East peace proposals be ridiculed, picked apart, stonewalled, and eventually discarded. What happened to the roadmap, the Mitchell Plan, the Tenet Plan, the Clinton Parameters, and the Beirut Declaration? I believe that we are now at a point where we must go directly to the core and defining and most difficult issues, the final status issues. Both sides know what they are, as they were laid out in the 2002 Beirut Initiative. These are the issues that have held Middle East peace hostage since 1967. The longer we allow the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to drift, the more dangerous and complicated it becomes for everyone, as it continues to severely weaken responsible Palestinian leaders, affecting their political capacity to engage, speak for, and negotiate on behalf of the Palestinian people. A path to acceptable Palestinian reconciliation must be found, and more support by the Arab world should be given to Egypt's efforts. No peace will be possible nor sustainable as long as the Palestinians remain a house divided. And this vacuum of failure further limits Israeli leaders' capacity to take calculated and difficult risks for peace and for their people. Who wins in this jungle of dangerous status quo? The same radical groups that have been winning and holding the peace process hostage as they continue to radicalize and terrorize the Middle East. Vacuums and conflicts are never filled by positive events, only more deeper distrust, destruction, and killing. That's where we've been. We must break out of this disastrous cycle. We must find a new pathway to peace. We must build a new framework that allows us the flexibility and capacity to continue to work toward the high ground of accommodation. Since the announcement by the Obama administration of the highly respected former Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell as the President's special envoy for Middle East peace, he has been pursuing opportunities for the basis for new peace talks, where all parties, the Israelis, the Palestinians, and the broader Arab leadership invest in and take risks, the risks needed for peace. It is always difficult for leaders to step forward, either in Ramallah, Tel Aviv, Riyadh, or Cairo, but none should let this opportunity be wasted. Now is the time when we must aggressively drive toward a two-state solution with the plain understanding that none who seek peace is served by further conflict, further intimidation, and further pain and suffering. We need a new peace process, and we need it now. Process is important. Process absorbs shocks. So every time a missile is launched into Israel at the beginning of a new peace initiative or ceasefire, both sides pull out, and we start all over. going back once again to the same futility of anger and violence that we've allowed to control the destinies of both Israelis and Arabs. We allow ourselves to be held captive to this historic madness. The extremists know exactly what they're doing, and we let them do it, and we all lose, except the extremists. Security guarantees will be a central part of any Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement, especially for Israel. This should be addressed at the front end of a new peace process negotiation framework. Israel will require this assurance as borders and settlements are negotiated. A working peacekeeping model of how this could be achieved has been in the Sinai since the Treaty of Peace was signed by Israel and Egypt in 1979. The Multinational Force and Observers, MFO, has worked effectively since the treaty was signed and currently has about 1,700 security professionals from 11 nations in the Sinai, including nearly 700 troops from the U.S. The MFO would not comply with every facet required for a guaranteed border security force in any Israeli-Palestinian peace treaty, but it is a model for an important role that the international community could play, led by the U.S. NATO may well be tapped for such a mission. As I conclude, let me wrap up with two additional factors in a Middle East peace. Iran. Preventing an Iranian nuclear weapons capability is a shared interest among the U.S., Israel, our Arab allies, and most states of the world. Sanctions, even multilateral sanctions, the only sanctions that have any effect, have a limited value and are limited in their effectiveness. Multilateral sanctions are tools and influences that nations can use, but only in coordination with other instruments of power. The U.S. must continue to lead on the Iranian front, working in coordination with our allies. This will require both short and long-term actions and proposals, and will include regional security guarantees. Arab states find themselves in a difficult bind when it comes to Iran. Anti-American and anti-Israeli agitation in the Middle East, spontaneous, contrived, or organized, means they keep their counsel close. They worry about a hegemonic, potentially nuclear-armed Iran, as well as what might be the reaction to a military strike on Iran by Israel, supported by or perceived to be supported by the United States. Tangible and substantive steps toward Arab-Israeli peace would give more flexibility and credibility to U.S. diplomats as they attempt to shape the regional political and diplomatic environment, a new environment that would encourage regional diplomacy. As Secretary of Defense Gates said recently about a military strike against Iran, there is no military option that does anything more than buy time. The other link to a comprehensive Middle East peace is Syria. Syria is at the intersection of many challenges for the United States in this area: Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Iran, Iraq, and the relationships with our important longtime ally, NATO ally, Turkey. Dealing with Syria is not easy, and it will require some time and energy and focus, like all complicated diplomatic relationships. I believe there is a real possibility of a shift in Syria's strategic thinking and policies for its own self-interest, not because they want to do a favor for Israel or the U.S. If we can convince Damascus to pause and reconsider its positions and support regarding Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, and radical Palestinian groups, we will have made progress for the entire Middle East. The next bilateral peace treaty for Israel is with Syria. This would give Israel peace treaties with 3 former border enemies, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, adding to its security and minimizing its risk for peace. We must address all of these Middle East linkages in order to have any kind of hope for a possibility of reaching a comprehensive agreement required for a just and lasting peace. And finally, why must we accept the failures of the past as the dull, half-lit beacons of the future? Did Begin Rabin, Sadat, and King Hussein accept the failed thinking of the past. They heard the call of history and acted on behalf of their people and their country's future. They did not fail their people. They did not fail history. They fulfilled the difficult and harsh responsibilities of leadership, real leadership. And it costs two of these great leaders their lives. Leadership always matters, and in the end, it is the final determinant of history. Our character, our humanity, and our wisdom must now find their way to a joining of global realities at another great confluence of historic proportions. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Jeremy. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Folks, I want you to know that I learned just about everything about having a conversation with anyone from Senator Chuck Hagel. No, seriously, thank you so much, Senator Hagel, for a rousing, important talk. We have just a few minutes. I've already been getting a signal from Jeremy Ben-Ami that we're going to have to move. But let me just, there's so many questions I would love to ask. And I'm so happy you set a serious tone, because there are things I'd like to get into about the chicken. Did you really wear a chicken costume in Halloween?
Only on special occasions.
Yeah, but it's true, isn't it? But let me ask you a question. On your wall in your former Senate office, you had a photo of yourself with George Bush and John McCain. And the inscription on that from President Bush was, "A rose between two thorns." And it occurs to me that you neither endorsed Barack Obama for president nor John McCain. And now you're about to go to work as an advisor to our president. And you also you also said, as I recall, that it is not unpatriotic to ask questions of your president. Very important Hegelism, as I recall. And let me ask you fairly, in your role as co-chair of the President's Federal Intelligence Advisory Board, as chairman of the Atlantic Council, an important civil society institution here, what do you expect from President Obama, or what would you have expected from President McCain in terms of getting the country's national security portfolio back on track? What are the 2 or 3 things that are most important to reinvent American leverage in the world that are your determinants of whether you're in the game with the person or you're gonna poke holes?
Well, to begin with, I think you must have some strong, deep belief in the purpose of your leadership, the purpose of your country. And only then can you be anchored to, from that point, reach a policy, a doctrine, with one very simple predicate. How do you make a better world? Why did you want to be President of the United States? Why do we have so many people here tonight who give so much of themselves, members of Congress, others? What is it? It should be about one thing, a better world. And only then can you be driven to, I believe, the right conclusions about overall and comprehensive ways you can use the power and the influence of this great nation. That then gets me to what this president has begun, and I think very effectively, engagement. I've never understood a great nation like the United States who would be afraid to engage. Why are we afraid to talk with someone? If we believe that we have a pretty good system, and I don't think we should go around the world imposing that on anyone, but if we have some sense of who we are and believe in who we are, then why wouldn't we engage? How in the world do we think we can make a better world? How in the world do we think isolating someone is going to somehow bring them around to your way of thinking? I think just the opposite. So engagement. Two, it seems to me a comprehensive framework of a foreign policy is essential, because I have never believed you can go to war in Iraq, you can go to war in Afghanistan, and believe that you can deal with those battlefields, those countries, in microcosms or narrow channels. These are regional issues. There will not be any peace in the Middle East or in Afghanistan, Central Asia, without Iran in
So Iran is
some way.
connected to Afghanistan.
It's all
Afghanistan
connected.
is connected to
It's all
Israel, Palestine,
connected.
it's connected to Syria.
The third point
Yeah.
I would make in answering your question is good people. Bring people around you who believe generally as you believe, not necessarily agreeing with you on every issue. In fact, I don't think you want that, but agreeing with your basic premise that you're here to make a better world. You have the privilege of serving your country and the people that you represent for one reason, and that's to make a better world. Everything in the world, all our interests fall within the larger framework of foreign policy. There isn't an issue we deal with in this country that is not connected to foreign policy in some way. Trade, environment, pandemic health, that we consider in some ways maybe domestic, but they're not. But they are all framed in this large world that we live in.
There's a great dinner they're having out there that I want to get to, and I know you do too.
I just want to drink.
I want to drink too. But let me finish. You know, Zbig Brzezinski is out here tonight. Henry Siegman is here. I hear Brent Scowcroft. I wake up in the morning and I'm one of these guys that said, what would Zbig Brzezinski and Brent Scowcroft do today? Because they have been telling president after president after president that there's no more defining challenge for this country but to show that we can achieve objectives we set for ourselves and deal with the global fault line in Israel-Palestine. So I am a great admirer of George Mitchell. Whoa, did you get one for me too? Yeah. All the way from Tel Aviv.
Thank you.
George Mitchell, great man. George Mitchell, Ireland. Ireland was not, Congressman Scott Murphy. Let's say a toast to Scott Murphy there.
Not exactly what I had in mind, but that's all right.
In a friendly, constructive way, yeah. I had under my Biden hat, ranking authority, etc. Just to finish off, what do you think that Senator Mitchell needs to put in his toolkit that he doesn't have in it today to get on the right track with Israel-Palestine?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't second-guess George Mitchell, but at the same time, I would respond this way.
Maybe you should go to George as to the White House tomorrow as George Mitchell.
Well, I see George fairly often, but the wise counselors that you noted before you mentioned Senator Mitchell, Brzezinski, Scowcroft, and others, they are as good and wise and smart a counselors as any president could have. And I think if we were all listening a little closer and had been listening a little closer to these individuals, we might be a little further along. But I would say on the George Mitchell side that I think that he is framing and responding and shaping where he feels he needs to be to start the new process with some significant anchoring of the reality of what he's dealing with. I think too often we get off into an environment of really not what's achievable, and we're not serious in many ways. And I would say this too, that goes back to the third point you made, is that we don't bring the influences and harness the power we have to be committed and focused to this effort like we need to. I think this administration is doing that. I think Mitchell understands that. I think Mitchell has got the right amount of patience, although I would say, and he will speak for himself and he does it very eloquently, that I think we are getting close to the time where something has to be laid down here on this.
Senator Hagel, thank you very, very much. I want to, just in closing, wish you a very happy Halloween. I know it's important. I want to thank everyone, so they know, I want to thank Vice President Biden and his staff, because I would not have done this without their support, believe me. I want to work in this town. But I want to also say that there are Republicans in this room, there are Democrats in this room, there are independents in this room, there are people from across the Israeli spectrum, political spectrum as well. Prince Turki Al Faisal from Saudi Arabia is here tonight. He said he was going to come without wearing a mask. I just want to say that you represent the healthiest kind of Republican that our country should have and needs to have more of. Thank you so much for being here. It's good to see all of you.